Sonichu's name is a portmanteau, or a combination, of the names Sonic the Hedgehog and Pikachu. Sonic, of course, gets his name from the fact that he's fast, or he can run at supersonic speed, and that he's a hedgehog. Pikachu's name is also a portmanteau. It mixes together the Japanese word Pika, which means lightning, and Chu, which means mouse. He is an electric mouse. Chris Chan combined Sonic the Hedgehog and Pikachu into Sonichu, but he made the name backwards. Sonichu would imply that the character is a mouse who can run at supersonic speed, when really, he's a hedgehog with electricity powers. His name should be Pika the Hedgehog. Chris Chan is normally very consistent and pays special attention to continuity within the Sonichu comics. Very often, payoffs come multiple issues after their setup, which is especially impressive when those issues are written years and years apart. But there are some instances when he makes some mistakes that are utterly mind-boggling. At the end of Sonichu episode 15, Chris travels back in time to his high school gym to obtain an Eschew ball. A girl is sitting in the stands, presumed to be one of his high school gal pals, and she reacts to his arrival. This is never followed up on, and this character never reappears, despite this being the cliffhanger that the episode ends on. What happened to her? We will never know. It's apparent to anyone who reads Sonichu that the series is a thinly veiled power fantasy for Chris Chan. This creates problems in the narrative as Chris's position in his real life changes. In the early issues, a sage reveals to Chris that his childhood crush, Sarah, is his soulmate across all lifetimes, and that he will end up marrying her. But by the time Chris wrote issue 5, Sarah had gotten married in real life, and so Chris was forced to move on. He includes her wedding in the issue, and writes it off by saying that he found a new love. That new love is also a real person, and she ended her friendship with Chris between issues. This creates the unintended implication that visions of the future within the Sonichu universe are very unreliable, because none of these fortunes end up coming true for Chris. The Sonichu and Rosechu species are technically Pokemon, and thus, like Pokemon, they give birth through eggs, despite being mammals. Unlike Pokemon, they also breastfeed and have sex to reproduce. It's implied within the Pokemon universe that Pokemon don't actually have sex. Human experts explicitly say that they don't know how Pokemon breed, and if it's the same way that humans breed, I would assume that they would have, figured it out. This makes it clear that Chris is playing fast and loose with Pokemon lore, but for some reason thought that Sonichu's laying eggs was important enough to not change. While writing Sonichu, Chris was convinced by multiple groups of trolls that several girls were interested in him. He chatted with them online as if they were his girlfriends, but eventually, the groups of trolls became aware of each other, and made Chris choose between them. Within the narrative of the trolls' deceits, Chris's love interest Sarah Jackson was killed in a car accident. Chris depicted this event in Sonichu, and dedicated a page to her. In the comic, the moment of impact is shown with absolutely no comprehension on Chris's part that this might be inappropriate. He also inexplicably drew the truck that hit her as Optimus Prime. Optimus Prime and other Transformers appear in the issues of Sonichu, making this more than just a visual reference. This means that canonically, in the Sonichu universe, the real Optimus Prime killed Chris's girlfriend. In the era before Chris Chan believed in the dimensional merge, there were still plenty of fictional characters from other franchises that appeared in the Sonichu comics. In one issue, the evil Sylvana Rosechu disguised herself as Meg Griffin from Family Guy to seduce Chris. Chris recognized her as Meg Griffin, implying that the show Family Guy exists in the Sonichu world, and that the fictional character Meg Griffin is played by Meg Griffin. This is slightly confusing because there's an instance in which Chris runs into somebody playing the part of Peter Griffin, but that character is an actor, and his name is Sammy. This means that in Sonichu, Peter Griffin is played by Sammy, but Meg Griffin is played by Meg Griffin. Before 2006, there were no visible gender differences between Pokemon, but in the Generation 4 games, they retconned in changes to Pokemon based on sex. The normal Pikachu design became the male version, and a version of Pikachu with a heart at the end of the tail became the female version. Because the Sonichu comics were written before this retcon, Chris Chan drew Rosechu with what later became the male Raichu tail. When trolls asked Chris if this meant that Rosechew was male before becoming Rosechew, Chris, instead of pointing out exactly what I just laid out earlier and retconning in a tale change of his own, instead retconned that Rosechew is transgender. This retcon also changes the framing of Sonichu's insistence in early issues that he is not homosexual. These issues are explored in the fan comic Rosechew's Story, which Chris then butchered in his own retelling, where he has Rosechew talk about her wee-wee. Sonichus and Rosechus normally don't wear clothes. When Chris Chan had to explain Sonichu sexual relations, or I should say when he felt like he needed to, because he definitely did not have to, he explained that Rosechew nipples only become visible when the Rosechew is aroused, and that Sonichu penises only become visible during sex. This does not explain why characters that normally don't wear clothes will wear bathing suits to the beach. But that is at least normal cartoon logic, so it makes sense that Chris would want to put them in clothes to signify that they were going swimming. What makes absolutely no sense is that Sonichu walks in on Bubbles Rosechew changing into her bridesmaid dress at his wedding, and it causes a commotion because he saw her naked. She's always naked. The only reason this would be embarrassing would be if she was aroused in the changing room of the church. Obviously, I don't think that that's what Chris was implying, I just think that he doesn't take his own lore into account, and so he ends up implying weird things like this. When Chris Chan's dog, Patty, died, Chris paid tribute to her by writing her into the Sonichu comics. He had her transform into an anthropomorphic dog with magical powers, and she goes on to live in Quickville. She appears sporadically throughout later issues of the series and even aids in Chris's battles against Mary Lee Walsh. She becomes a real character in the narrative, just as much as any of Chris's fictional hedgehogs. The same cannot be said for Chris's many, many deceased cats, who have not been given the anthropomorphic animal treatment and have not been introduced to Sonichu lore. In 2008, Barack Obama became the first black president of the United States, which was a massive symbolic victory for race relations at the time. A fairly common joke, if it can be called that, around the time that Obama was officially inaugurated and took office, was that he wouldn't be living in the White House. He would turn it into the Black House, because he's black. Get it? Chris Chan's father told him this joke, and Chris apparently thought it was funny enough to include in the Sonichu comics. In Sonichu issue number 8, Sonichu is infiltrating the headquarters of 4 Cent Garbage, and on each floor he's stopping to view what's going on. Chris includes this joke on one of the floors, so apparently the entire White House, including the lawn and sky, are contained on one floor of this building in Tennessee. This might also imply that when Chris single-handedly makes the building collapse, leading to hundreds of casualties, he's also destroying the White House and killing the president. The Chaos Emeralds are 7 fictional gemstones from Sonic the Hedgehog. Obtaining all of them allows Sonic to transform into his super form, where he turns yellow and produces a glowing aura. The emeralds and this super form are both references to the manga series Dragon Ball, which centers on 7 magical orbs that grant wishes, and the main character Goku, who can transform into a strong Super Saiyan with yellow hair and a glowing aura. Upon being used, the Chaos Emeralds and the Dragon Balls scatter and must be collected again. Within Chris Chan's Sonichu comic, there are 7 magical S-Chew balls, which are clear homages to the Chaos Emeralds, but because the S-Chew balls are designed to look like Pokeballs, they are round. So, they are basically orbs that must be gathered to power up the main character, which makes them resemble the Dragon Balls more than the Chaos Emeralds, bringing all of the references full circle. Several real people appear in the Sonichu comics, and I don't just mean Megan Schroeder and Chris's parents, I mean famous people. These include Billy Mays, Barack Obama, John McCain, Vladimir Putin, Seth MacFarlane, and Mike Judge. But the Sonichu canon also included famous people who were turned into Sonichus, including Ted Bundy and Hitler. Yes, if you were somehow unaware, Bundy-Chew is real. The Sonichu comics often include advertisements and parodies of advertisements within their pages, just like a normal comic book would. In Sonichu issue 5, Chris includes an ad from the Virginia is for Virgins Committee, proudly declaring that Virginia is, in fact, for virgins. This is a play on the official slogan of Virginia, Virginia is for lovers, which the state adopted in 1969. Chris, as a frustrated, self-described virgin with rage, apparently took issue with his home state's celebration of love while he was eternally alone, and so he began asserting that Virginia is in fact for virgins, like himself. and like the state's namesake. There are no fewer than 4 characters in the Sonichu comics named Sarah. Sarah Hammer is named after Chris's real childhood friend, and in the comics temporarily became Chris's love interest. Sarah Jackson and Sarah Mackenzie were trolls in real life, who wormed their way into the comics. Chris included details about his relationships with them. Sarah Jackson was killed by Optimus Prime, and Chris ended his relationship with Sarah Mackenzie when he found out she was a troll. Sonichu and Rosechu also named their daughter Sarah, spelled C-E-R-A, possibly after Sarah Hammer, bringing the total number of Sarahs up to 4. Content warning for this one, guys, we're talking about Robbie Sani. Robbie Sani was Sonichu and Rosechu's only son, but by the time he was 10 years old, he realized that he actually identified as a female. He struggled with coming out, but eventually took on the identity of Roberta Sonichu. An episode of Sonichu is dedicated to Robbie's coming out story, which culminates with Robbie talking to Sonichu and Rosechu's 2 daughters and coming out to them. After a heartfelt conversation about accepting Robbie no matter what, the 3 siblings hug, which causes Robbie to evolve from a Sani into a Sonichu. Robbie then ejaculates all over the rug in his sister's bedroom, for some reason. The obvious joke to make here would be that Chris is advocating for incest, but he'd never do that. Right? Sonichu issue 11 is so boring that Chris stopped working on the comic for 5 years. He came back because someone paid him $1,000 to continue the book, so he wrote 5 pages and then stopped for another 2 years. Thankfully after that, Chris started consistently writing Sonichu again, up until his arrest. He now claims that he's written plenty more Sonichu books in the other dimension, and thus he does not need to write them here, because once the dimensions merge, he can just grab the ones he's already written from the other universe and sell them to us. So we've once again entered a multi-year long Sonichu-less slump. This is the best panel in Sonichu history. That's the fun fact. That's it. I've never seen a more amazing distillation of bad fanfics than whatever this is. You could remove it from the context of Chris Chan and Sonichu, and it would stand on its own as a perfect example of terribleness, and I love it so much. This character's name is Inos, and he's a drug addict who lives in the streets of Quickville. When the Sonichu gang stumbles upon him, he offers them drugs. The drug he uses is apparently called Dig. Chris both draws and writes Inos as explicitly Jamaican, thus leading to the line in which Inos asks the heroes if they want some Dig, mon, because that looks kind of like the word Digimon. So Chris went to all of this effort just so he could make a pun on the term Digimon. He invented a new drug and made a character Jamaican just for that. Chris Chan is very proud of the fact that he hand draws his comics. In fact, for many years, he tried to argue that his comics were superior to those drawn on computers. Despite this, Chris would scan his pages onto his computer and then add word bubbles using the PC. His comics were also, of course, uploaded online, so for some reason, Chris titled the cover of Sonichu issue 5, EB Fleeby 05. And we know this because we can look at the file name of what he uploaded. Is this some long-term foreshadowing of a yet-to-be-unveiled alternative name for Sonichu? No, probably not. Sonichu issue 1 is named Niwo Per Der Plaboom 01. At the end of Sonichu number 1, Chris displays an email he wrote to Hannah, a girl who pranked him by going on a fake date with him. Chris found out the date was fake, and it made him even sadder than before, when he was just a lonely, single man. Now he's had his heart broken. In the email, he says that what Hannah did was not very nice, but that he still thinks that she's pretty, and if she ever changes her mind, she should hit him up, because he got good grades in high school, as long as she doesn't smoke or already have a boyfriend. In some issues of Sonichu, Chris includes advertisements for non-existent Sonichu-related merchandise. One advertises Sonichu Pokemon cards. The Sonichu card says, after being exposed to the 7 Chaos Emeralds, a Pikachu evolved into a Sonichu. He's apparently level 36 and is a common rarity. Sonichu issue 16 barely exists at all. It was originally issue 14 before Chris Chan decided he'd rather write about the dimensional merge, and so issue 14 became a semi-autobiographical account of Chris going to a convention and preaching his religion. The new issue 16 is about Count Graduan, a villain who was defeated many issues ago, and who is also apparently a vampire. The only reason we know about this issue is because Chris spilled coffee on his partially completed pages, and then decided to sell them on eBay. For $100, you could have owned Chris's literal garbage. In case the story of Chris Chan hasn't made you lose faith in humanity so far, maybe the knowledge that this sold after being up for only 2 minutes will. In Sonichu issue number 3, Chris Chan introduces the chaotic combo with individual origin stories. Wild Sonichu's is unintelligible, as the dialogue is all Pokemon saying their names, and Chris's drawing is not good enough to depict what's actually going on. Angelica Rosechu evolved from a Rosie into a Rosechu randomly in her sleep, with Chris watching from her bedroom window with half-squinted eyes. And when Magichan first evolved, he farted. Writing of this caliber is hard to come by now that Chris is in jail.
In Sonichu issue 13, Quickville is the battleground between warring armies of the Australatinas and Russia. Joining in this battle are ponies from Equestria, as well as Transformers and Pokemon. One of the other sides fighting on this endless war are the Nazis, led by Hitler Sonichu. Chris's depiction of the Nazi forces is this shape. In case you need to be brushed up on world history, this is in fact not a swastika. It's facing the complete wrong direction, and it's just drawn horribly. On the same page, Chris drew a not-too-bad depiction of a car, and then this is his swastika. He didn't even bother to see if it was facing the right way. I'm so glad that this series is over.